Maya Cheung sat in the back row of the music room, her violin case resting against her chair. She liked sitting there. Nobody could see her make mistakes. Nobody watched her too closely. She could play her music and blend in with all the other students. The morning sun came through the tall windows of the conservatory. Maya had been going to this music school for 3 years now. She was good at playing the violin, but she was not the best. She was not the worst either. She was just somewhere in the middle, and that was exactly where she wanted to be. Maya had started playing violin when she was 7 years old. Her grandmother taught her the first few notes. Her grandmother had beautiful hands that moved like birds across the strings. She would hum old songs while Maya practiced. Those were happy times. Now Maya was 21 and her grandmother was gone, but she still remembered those songs. The other students were talking and laughing before class started. Maya opened her violin case and checked her strings. She always did this. It was her routine. First the G string, then D, then A, then each string had the sound just right. "Attention everyone," Professor Williams called out. He was a tall man with gray hair and serious eyes. He had played with famous orchestras when he was younger. Now he taught students like Maya. "I have some bad news." The room became quiet. Maya looked up from her violin. "Sarah Martinez cannot play in next week's gala," Professor Williams said. Sarah was the best violin player in their class. She always got the solo parts. Everyone expected her to become famous one day. She is in the hospital with pneumonia. She will be fine, but she cannot perform. Maya felt sorry for Sarah. She also felt a little worried. The gala was a big event. Rich people came to listen to the music. They gave money to the school. Important music critics would be there too. If something went wrong, it would be very bad, so we need someone else to play the solo, Professor Williams continued. His eyes moved around the room. Maya tried to make herself smaller in her chair. She did not want to be chosen. Playing solo meant standing alone on stage. It meant everyone would watch only her. It meant she could not hide her mistakes, Professor Williams looked at each student. Maya knew he was thinking about who could do it. There was Jennifer, who played very fast but sometimes made mistakes. There was David, who had good technique but got nervous easily. There was Amy, who played beautifully but was only in her 2nd year. "Maya Chun," Professor Williams said. Maya's heart stopped. She looked up with wide eyes. "Me? Yes, you?" "Professor." Williams walked over to her. "You have solid technique. You are reliable. You do not make many mistakes." Maya felt her hands start to shake. "But Professor, I am not ready for a solo. I have never played alone in front of so many people." "The piece is simple," Professor Williams said. He went to his desk and picked up some sheet music. "It is Pachelbel's Canon in D. Know this piece?" Every violin player knows this piece. Maya did know the canon. It was one of the first classical pieces she had learned completely. She could play it with her eyes closed. But playing it alone on stage was different from playing it in class. "I do not think I can do it," Maya said quietly. Professor Williams sat down next to her. "Maya, you are a good student. You come to every class. You practice every day. You listen carefully and you learn quickly. You just need confidence." Maya looked at the sheet music he handed her. The notes looked the same as always, but somehow they seemed scarier now. What if I make mistakes? What if I forget the music? What if the audience does not like it? "The canon is a safe choice," Professor Williams said. "It is beautiful and familiar. People love this piece. Just play it clean and simple, nothing fancy. Do not try to add anything extra. Just serve the music and stay invisible. Stay invisible." Maya had been staying invisible her whole life. That was supposed to be the easy part. But how could she stay invisible when she would be standing alone on a stage with hundreds of people watching her? "The gala is in 3 days," Professor Williams said. "That gives you time to prepare. I know you can do this, Maya." Maya took the sheet music with shaking hands. Around her, the other students were whispering. She could hear them talking about her. Some seemed surprised that she was chosen. Others seemed relieved that they were not chosen. "Is that really the best choice?" she heard Jennifer whisper to David. She is so quiet, David whispered back. Can she handle a crowd that big? Maya pretended not to hear them, but their words hurt. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was not the right person for this job. Maybe Professor Williams had made a mistake. The class continued with normal practice, but Maya could not focus. She kept looking at the canon music on her stand. The notes seemed to dance around on the page. Her bow felt heavy in her hand. Even simple scales sounded wrong. After class, Maya packed her violin slowly. She was the last student in the room. Professor Williams was cleaning the blackboard. Professor, Maya said quietly, are you sure about this? Maybe Amy would be better? She plays with more feeling. Professor Williams turned around. Maya, I chose you for a reason. You have something special even if you do not see it yet. Trust me on this. Maya wanted to believe him, but doubt filled her mind like dark clouds. She had never been special at anything. She was the quiet girl who sat in the back. She was the student who never raised her hand. She was the violin player who never made mistakes but never made magic either that evening. Maya sat in her small apartment with the canon music spread out on her kitchen table. She lived alone in a tiny place near the school. It was not much, but it was quiet and she could practice without bothering neighbors. She picked up her violin and started to play the familiar melody. The notes came easily. She had played this piece hundreds of times, but tonight something felt different. Tonight these notes would soon be played for hundreds of strangers. Tonight this simple piece carried the weight of her future. Maya played the canon 3 times before stopping. Her fingers were stiff with worry. In 3 days she would stand on the stage of the famous Hartwell Concert Hall. In 3 days she would either prove that Professor Williams was right to trust her, or she would fail in front of everyone who mattered in the music world. She put down her violin and looked out her window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, people were buying tickets to the gala. They were expecting to hear beautiful music. They were expecting to be moved and inspired. Maya wondered if she could give them what they wanted. She picked up the sheet music one more time. Just play it clean and simple, she whispered to herself, repeating Professor Williams's words. Nothing fancy. Stay invisible. But as Maya looked at those familiar notes, she had no idea that in 3 days, staying invisible would be the last thing on her mind. Maya walked into the Hartwell Concert Hall for the first time the next morning. Her violin case felt heavier than usual as she pushed through the heavy wooden doors. The moment she stepped inside, she stopped breathing for a second. The hall was huge, much bigger than she had imagined. Red velvet seats stretched out in perfect rows, rising up like a mountain toward the back. The ceiling was painted with gold angels and clouds. Crystal chandeliers hung down like frozen fireworks. Maya had seen pictures of this place, but being inside it made her feel very small. Impressive, is it not? Professor Williams appeared beside her. This hall has been here for over 100 years. Some of the greatest musicians in history have played on that stage. Maya looked toward the front of the hall. The stage was wide and deep, with a grand piano sitting on one side like a sleeping giant. She tried to picture herself standing there, alone, but the image made her stomach hurt. Yo-Yo Ma played here, Professor Williams continued. Itzhak Perlman, Joshua Bell, Sarah Chang, all the violin masters you have studied. Maya knew those names. She had listened to their recordings for years. She had watched videos of their performances and dreamed of playing half as well as they did. The idea that she would soon stand where they had stood felt impossible. Other students were arriving for rehearsal. Maya watched them walk onto the stage like it was nothing special. But for them, it was nothing special. Most of them had performed in big halls. Before, most of them had parents who were musicians. Most of them had been training for moments like this since they were children. Maya was different. Her parents ran a small restaurant in Chinatown. They worked long hours and came home tired. They loved her music, but they did not understand it. When she told them about the gala, her mother had asked if she would get paid. Her father had asked if it would help her get a job after school. Maya, Come meet the other musicians? Professor Williams called. Maya walked onto the stage, her shoes making small clicking sounds on the polished wood. The stage lights were bright and warm. She could feel the empty seats watching her, waiting. To be filled with people in 3 days, the orchestra was already setting up. Maya recognized most of the players from school, but there were also some professional musicians who had been hired for the gala. They looked comfortable and confident as they tuned their instruments and joked with each other. Everyone, this is Maya Chun, Professor Williams announced. She will be playing the canon solo. The talking stopped. Maya felt 20 pairs of eyes looking at her. She managed a small wave and tried to smile. Nice to meet you, said the first violin section leader. Her name was Rachel, and she was a graduate student. I heard about Sarah. That is too bad. Yes, Maya said quietly. I hope she gets better soon. Have you performed much? Asked the cellist, an older man with kind eyes. Not really, Maya admitted. This is my first real solo. She saw some of the musicians exchange glances. It was not mean exactly, but Maya could tell what they were thinking. They were wondering if she was good enough. They were wondering if she would make mistakes that would make them all look bad. Well, the canon is a good piece to start with, Rachel said. It is forgiving. Even if you make small mistakes, most people will not notice. Maya was not sure if this was supposed to make her feel better. It did not. Professor Williams handed out the music and they began to rehearse. Maya sat with the first violins and played her part quietly. When it came time for her solo, she stood up and played the melody clearly and correctly. It sounded fine. It sounded safe. Good, Professor Williams said when she finished. Clean and precise. That is exactly what we want. But Maya noticed that nobody seemed excited. Nobody seemed moved. They nodded politely and moved on to the next piece. Maya sat back down and tried not to think about all the famous violinists who had made audiences cry with their performances. On this same stage, during the break, Maya walked around the hall by herself. She climbed up to the balcony and looked down at the stage from where the audience would sit. The stage looked even bigger from up there. She tried to imagine all the seats filled with people in fancy clothes, all watching her. Behind her, she heard 2 of the professional musicians talking. She seems nice enough, one of them said. Yes, but does she have any fire? The other replied. I mean, she plays correctly, but where is the passion? Where is the music that makes you feel something? Maybe she is just nervous. Some people need time to warm up. Maybe, but the canon is such a beautiful piece. It deserves more than just correct notes. Maya pretended to study the program notes on the wall, but she was listening to every word. They were right, she knew. She played the notes correctly, but she did not make people feel anything. She had always been told that was enough. Play the right notes at the right time and you will be fine. But now she wondered if fine was really enough. She went back downstairs and practiced in one of the small rooms backstage. She played the canon, over and over, trying to add more feeling to it. But every time she tried to do something different, it sounded wrong to her ears. She was afraid of making mistakes. She was afraid of standing out too much. She was afraid of not being perfect. That afternoon, Maya went home and called her grandmother's sister, Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda had also played violin when she was young. I am so nervous, Maya told her. I do not think I am good enough for this. Tell me about the piece you are playing, Aunt Linda said. It is Pachelbel's canon. It is beautiful, but everyone knows it. Everyone has heard it 1,000 times. How can I make it special? Do you remember how your grandmother used to play? Aunt Linda asked. Maya smiled for the first time that day. She played with her whole heart. She made every note sound like it mattered. That is right. She did not just play the notes. She told stories with her music. Each song meant something to her. But I do not know how to do that, Maya said. I only know how to play correctly. Playing correctly is important, Aunt Linda said. But music is about more than being correct. Music is about sharing your heart with other people. After they hung up, Maya sat with her violin and thought about her grandmother. She remembered sitting next to her on the old piano bench, watching her fingers dance across the strings. Her grandmother had never worried about playing perfectly. She had played with joy and love and sadness and hope. She had played like the music was part of her soul. Maya picked up her violin and started to play the canon again. This time, she tried not to think about the notes. She tried to think about why this piece was so loved by so many people. She tried to feel what made it beautiful. As she played, she remembered her grandmother humming along to old songs. She remembered the way music had filled their small apartment with warmth and light. She remembered how her grandmother had told her that music was a gift you shared with the world. For a moment, just a moment, Maya felt something different in her playing. It was small, like a tiny flame starting to flicker. But it was there. Then she remembered the big stage and the important people who would be watching, and the feeling disappeared. The flame went out. Maya put down her violin and sighed. 2 more days until the gala. 2 more days to figure out how to be something more than just correct. 2 more days to find the courage to share her heart with strangers. Maya looked at herself in the bathroom mirror that night. She saw a scared young woman with worried eyes. She did not see a musician who could move people with her playing. She did not see someone who belonged on the same stage as the violin masters, but somewhere deep inside, in a place she could barely feel, that tiny flame was still there. It was waiting for the right moment to grow bigger. It was waiting for Maya to be brave enough to let it burn. The day of the gala started with rain. Maya woke up to the sound of water hitting her apartment window like tiny stones. She had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself on stage making terrible mistakes while hundreds of people watched. Maya got dressed slowly. She had bought a new black dress for the performance. It was simple and elegant, like Professor Williams had told her to be. She looked at herself in the mirror and practiced smiling. The smile looked fake and scared. The rain got heavier as the day went on. By afternoon, it was a real storm with thunder and lightning. Maya watched from her window as people ran down the street with newspapers over their heads. She wondered if the storm was a bad sign. Maya arrived at the concert hall 3 hours before the performance. She wanted extra time to practice and get used to the stage. The backstage area was busy with musicians warming up and stage workers moving equipment. Maya found a quiet corner and opened her violin case. Her hands were shaking as she picked up her bow. She tried to play some scales, but her fingers felt stiff and cold. The notes sounded thin and weak. Maya took a deep breath and tried again, still weak, still scared. Maya, there you are. Professor Williams appeared with a program in his hand. Look at this. Your name is printed right here. Maya looked at the fancy program. There was her name in black letters, Maya Chun, violin solo. It looked strange to see it there, like it belonged to someone else. The donors are starting to arrive, Professor Williams said. I saw some very important people in the lobby. This is a big night for the school. Maya nodded, but her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies doing backflips. Important people meant important expectations. Important expectations meant important consequences if she failed. An hour before the show, Maya went to look at the audience from behind the stage curtain. The hall was filling up with people in expensive clothes. She saw older men in tuxedos and women wearing jewelry that sparkled under the chandeliers. She saw younger people who looked like music critics with their notebooks and serious faces. They look friendly enough, said Rachel, the section leader, coming up beside Maya. They look terrifying, Maya whispered back. Rachel laughed. They are just people who love music. They want you to succeed. They want to hear something beautiful. Maya wished she could believe that, but all she could see were hundreds of strangers who would judge every note she played. All she could think about were the famous violinists who had played on this stage before her. How could she possibly live up to that history? 30 minutes before the show, the orchestra gathered backstage for final instructions. Professor Williams looked at each musician and gave them encouraging words. When he got to Maya, he put his hand on her shoulder. Remember what I told you, he said quietly. Play it clean and simple, nothing fancy. Just serve the music and stay invisible. The piece will carry you, Maya nodded. Stay invisible. That was supposed to be easy for her. She had been invisible her whole life. But standing on a stage with a spotlight on her seemed like the opposite of invisible. The orchestra walked onto the stage and took their seats. Maya sat with the first violins and tried to blend in with the other players. The audience applauded politely as the musicians tuned their instruments. Maya could feel hundreds of eyes looking at the stage, but she kept her head down and focused on her violin. The first piece of the evening was a Mozart symphony. Maya played her part automatically, but her mind was thinking about what would come. Next, after the symphony would be a piano concerto. After the piano concerto would be her solo. The canon in D5 minutes that would either make her career or destroy her confidence forever. During the intermission, Maya stayed backstage while the audience stretched their legs and talked about the music they had heard so far. She could hear their voices through the walls, laughing and discussing the performances. They sounded happy and relaxed. Maya felt neither happy nor relaxed. "You are going to be wonderful," said the cellist who had been kind to her during rehearsal. "I can tell you have been practicing hard." "I hope so," Maya said. "I just want to not embarrass myself." "You will do more than that," he said with a smile. "I have a good feeling about tonight." Maya wished she shared his confidence. She felt like she was about to jump off a cliff, without knowing if there was water below to catch her. The second half of the concert began with the piano concerto. Maya listened from the wings as the pianist played with incredible skill and emotion. The audience was completely focused, hanging on every note. Maya wondered if she could ever command attention like that. Then it was time. Professor Williams introduced her to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Maya Chun, who will perform Pachelbel's Canon in D." Maya walked onto the stage on shaking legs. The applause was polite but not overwhelming. She could feel the heat of the stage lights on her face and the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her every move. She took her position at center stage and raised her violin to her chin. For a moment, Maya looked out at the audience. She could see their faces in the front rows, expectant and curious. She could see the critics with their pens ready to write reviews. She could see Professor Williams in the wings, giving her an encouraging nod. Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. In her mind, she heard Professor Williams's voice. "Just play it clean and simple. Nothing fancy. Stay invisible." She placed her bow on the strings and began to play the first notes of the canon. The melody floated out into the hall, sweet and familiar. Maya played exactly what was written on the page, exactly as she had practiced 1,000 times. Clean and simple. Just like she had been told, but as she played, something unexpected happened. In her mind, she began to hear another melody weaving itself around Pachelbel's notes. It was a tune her grandmother used to hum when Maya was little. It was simple and beautiful. Like a lullaby or a prayer, Maya tried to ignore the melody in her head and focus on playing the written music. But the grandmother's tune kept getting stronger, kept calling to her. It seemed to fit perfectly with the canon, like it had always belonged there. For a moment, Maya felt torn between two choices. She could keep playing safely, exactly as written, exactly as expected. Or she could follow the voice of her grandmother's memory and see where it led. The audience sat quietly, listening to her performance. They seemed pleased with what they were hearing, but not excited. Maya was giving them exactly what they expected from Pachelbel's canon. Correct notes played correctly, but somewhere in Maya's heart, a small voice was whispering that correct was not enough. Somewhere in her memory, her grandmother was humming that beautiful melody and waiting for Maya to be brave enough to let it out. Maya opened her eyes and looked out at the audience again. She saw their polite, patient faces. She saw their expensive clothes and their important titles. She saw everything. That had been making her afraid, and then in that moment, Maya made a choice that would change everything. Instead of staying invisible, instead of playing it safe, she decided to trust the voice of her grandmother's memory. She decided to let the melody in her heart join the melody on the page. Maya's bow began to dance across the strings with new purpose. The familiar canon was still there, but now it was growing, expanding, becoming something more than it had ever been before. Maya was not just playing the notes anymore. She was telling a story, her grandmother's story, a story of love and loss and hope and dreams. The change was subtle at first, but the audience felt it immediately. People who had been half listening suddenly sat up straighter. Conversations that had been continuing in whispered tones stopped completely. Even the critics put down their pens and simply listened. Maya was no longer invisible. She was no longer safe. But for the first time in her life, she was completely, authentically herself. Maya felt the change happen inside her like a door opening in her heart. The safe, careful version of the canon that she had practiced so many times was still there, but now it was joined by something else. Something that came from a deeper place inside her soul. The melody her grandmother used to hum wove itself around Pachelbel's notes like silk thread through a tapestry. Maya had never planned this. She had never practiced adding anything to the original music. But now, standing under the bright lights with hundreds of people listening, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Maya's left hand began to add small ornaments to the melody. Her fingers found notes that were not written on any page, but that seemed to belong exactly where she placed them. Her bow moved with a new kind of freedom, drawing sounds from her violin that she did not know she could make in the orchestra. Pitt, the other musicians, looked up in surprise. This was not what they had rehearsed. This was not the simple, safe performance that Professor Williams had planned. But as Maya's new melody flowed over them, they found themselves drawn into her musical story. The cellist, who had been kind to Maya during rehearsal, smiled as he recognized what was happening. Maya was not just playing notes anymore. She was creating music that came from her heart. He adjusted his playing slightly to support her new interpretation. Giving her a foundation to build on, one by one, the other musicians began to follow Maya's lead. The second violins added gentle harmonies that complemented her grandmother's melody. The violas provided a warm middle voice that connected the high and low instruments. Even the double bass player found ways to make his deep notes sing along with Maya's soaring violin. But Maya was not thinking about the orchestra. She was not thinking about the audience. She was not thinking about Professor Williams or the critics, or the important donors. She was thinking about her grandmother. Maya remembered sitting in her grandmother's small kitchen, watching her cook dinner while humming that beautiful melody. Her grandmother's hands had been old and wrinkled, but they moved with such grace as she stirred soup and kneaded bread. The humming had filled the kitchen with warmth and love, making even simple meals feel like celebrations. As Maya played, she could almost smell her grandmother's cooking. She could almost feel her grandmother's gentle hand on her shoulder, guiding her through difficult passages of music. She could almost hear her grandmother's voice saying, "Music is not about being perfect, little one. Music is about sharing your heart." The audience felt the change too, though they could not have explained what was happening. People who had been checking their watches or thinking about their dinner plans found themselves completely focused on the young woman with the violin. The music was washing over them like a warm tide, carrying away their worries and filling them with something they had not expected to feel. Mrs. Henderson, who came to the gala every year and usually spent the evening thinking about her charity work, found herself remembering her own grandmother. The melody Maya was playing reminded her of songs her grandmother had sung while they baked cookies together. Tears formed in her eyes as she realized she had not thought about those precious memories in years. Mr. Rodriguez, a music critic who had heard thousands of performances and thought he could never be surprised again, leaned forward in his seat. He had come expecting to hear another student play Pachelbel's canon exactly like every other student he had ever heard. Instead, he was hearing something completely fresh and original. Something that made the familiar piece sound like it had been written just moments ago. In the wings, Professor Williams watched with a mixture of amazement and fear. This was not what he had taught Maya to do. This was not safe or predictable. This was exactly the kind of risk-taking that could go horribly wrong in front of such an important audience. But as Professor Williams listened, he realized that Maya was not making mistakes. She was making magic. Every note she added felt right. Every ornament she created enhanced the original melody instead of competing with it. She was doing something he had never seen a student do before. She was making Pachelbel's canon, completely her own while still honoring the composer's original vision. Maya reached the middle section of the piece where the melody traditionally becomes more complex. Instead of simply playing the written variations, she began to weave her grandmother's tune more boldly through the music. Her violin sang with two voices now, Pachelbel's formal, mathematical beauty and her grandmother's warm, human emotion. The combination should not have worked. Classical music and folk melody, European tradition and Asian heritage, written notes and improvised feeling, they were from different worlds. But in Maya's hands, they came together like old friends who had been waiting their whole lives to meet. Maya's bow danced across the strings with increasing confidence. She was no longer the frightened student who had walked onto the stage. She was no longer worried about making mistakes or disappointing people. She was a musician telling a story that mattered to her, sharing a piece of her soul with anyone willing to listen. The violin section leader, Rachel, found herself playing with more passion than she had felt in months. Maya's fearless performance was inspiring her to take risks too. She added subtle harmonies that she would never have attempted during rehearsal, trusting that Maya's strong musical foundation would support any chances she took. Even the conductor, who had been hired just for this one performance and had not worked with Maya before, found himself following her lead instead of trying to control her. He could see that something special was happening, something that could not be planned or rehearsed. His job now was to help the orchestra support Maya's vision, not to impose his own ideas on her performance. Maya felt the orchestra responding to her music, and their support gave her even more courage. She began to take the melody into territory that was completely uncharted. Her grandmother's tune grew stronger and more complex, sometimes leading Pachelbel's melody and sometimes following it, like two dancers learning each other's steps. The audience was completely silent now, except for the occasional soft gasp of amazement. People who had never heard classical music before were discovering that it could speak directly to their hearts. People who thought they knew everything about Pachelbel's canon were hearing it as if for the first time. Maya closed her eyes again and let the music carry her wherever it wanted to go. She trusted her fingers to find the right notes. She trusted her heart to guide her bow. She trusted her grandmother's memory to show her the way. In that moment, Maya understood what her Aunt Linda had meant about sharing your heart with other people. She was not just playing a violin solo. She was offering her most precious memories to a room full of strangers. She was taking the love her grandmother had given her and multiplying it into something that could touch hundreds of lives. The canon was building toward its climactic finale, but Maya was no longer following the traditional structure. She was creating her own journey, her own destination. And everyone in the hall, musicians, audience members, critics, and staff, was traveling with her, eager to see where her brave heart would take them all. Maya opened her eyes and looked directly into the audience for the first time since she had started playing. What she saw surprised her. Instead of the polite, distant faces she expected, she saw people who were completely caught up in her music. Some were leaning forward in their seats. Others had their eyes closed, letting the melody wash over them. A few were wiping away tears. This gave Maya a feeling she had never experienced before. She was not invisible anymore. She was not hiding in the back row. She was standing in the center of a great hall, commanding the attention of hundreds of people with nothing but her violin and her heart. And instead of being terrifying, it felt wonderful. Maya let this new confidence flow into her playing. Her bow moved with bold, sweeping strokes that drew rich, full sounds from her violin. She was no longer afraid of making the notes too loud or too emotional. She was no longer worried about what Professor Williams had taught her about staying safe and simple. The grandmother's melody that had been weaving quietly through the canon now stepped forward to take the lead. Maya played it with the full power of her instrument, letting it soar above the orchestra like a bird taking flight. The familiar Pachelbel harmony was still there, but now it served as a foundation for something entirely new. Maya began to add techniques that she had never used in performance before. She used quick light bowing to create dancing rhythms. She slid between notes to create the crying sounds that reminded her of her grandmother's voice. She played some phrases very softly, drawing the audience closer, then burst into powerful passages that filled every corner of the hall. In the orchestra, the musicians were experiencing something they had never felt during a student performance. Usually, when they played with students, they had to work hard to keep everything together. Students often got nervous and played too fast or too slow. Students often made mistakes that the professionals had to cover up, but Maya was different. Even though she was completely changing the music from what they had rehearsed, she was doing it with such clear musical intention that they could follow her easily. She was not making random changes. She was telling a story, and they could hear where the story was going. The flute player found herself adding gentle decorations to Maya's melody when it came through her section. The horn players discovered they could provide warm, supporting harmonies that made Maya's violin sound even more beautiful. Even the timpani player, who usually just kept steady rhythm, found places where he could add gentle emphasis to Maya's most emotional moments. Professor Williams stood in the wings, watching his quiet student transform into something he had never imagined possible. Part of him was worried. Maya was breaking every rule he had taught her about performance. She was taking huge risks in front of the most important audience of her young career, but another part of him was amazed. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen a student discover their own musical voice so completely and so suddenly. Maya was not just playing Pachelbel's canon anymore. She was creating her own composition, using the canon as a starting point for a musical journey that was uniquely hers. Maya reached a point in the piece where the traditional version would begin to wind down toward the ending. But Maya was not ready to end her story yet. Instead of following Pachelbel's structure, she took the melody in a completely new direction. She began to play with extreme dynamics, making some phrases whisper soft and others powerfully loud. She changed the rhythm, sometimes playing behind the beat to create tension, sometimes rushing ahead to create excitement. She used every technique she had ever learned, but she used them in service of the emotional story she was telling. The audience was completely entranced. Maya's music was taking them on an emotional journey that none of them had expected when they came to hear a simple violin solo. They felt joy when Maya's melody danced with lightness and grace. They felt sadness when her violin cried with longing. They felt hope when her music climbed toward the ceiling like a prayer being answered. Mrs. Chun, an elderly woman who had immigrated from Taiwan 50 years ago, found herself crying as Maya played. The melody reminded her of songs her own mother had sung to her as a child. She had not heard those songs in decades, but Maya's music brought back memories, so vivid that she could almost smell the jasmine flowers that grew outside her childhood. Dr. Williams, the head of the music department, sat in the front row with his mouth slightly open. He had heard thousands of student performances over his career. Most were competent. Some were very good. A few were excellent. But he had never heard a student performance that was genuinely revolutionary. Maya was not just playing well. She was redefining what it meant to perform classical music. She was showing that it was possible to honor tradition while still expressing your own individual voice. She was proving that the most powerful performances came not from perfect technique, but from authentic emotion. As Maya continued to develop her musical story, she began to incorporate elements that were not classical at all. She played some phrases with the sliding, bending notes that she remembered from Chinese folk music. She used rhythms that reminded her of the pop songs she heard on the radio. She even included some techniques from jazz that she had picked up from listening to recordings. None of this should have worked with Pachelbel's canon. The piece was written in the Baroque period, with very specific rules about harmony and structure. Adding modern elements to it should have sounded wrong, like wearing sneakers with a formal dress, but Maya's musical instincts were so strong that everything she added enhanced the original beauty of the piece instead of fighting against it. She found ways to blend different musical styles that respected each tradition, while creating something completely new. the orchestra members found themselves playing with more passion than they had felt in years. Maya's fearless creativity was inspiring them to take their own risks. The violist added a solo line that he had never played before. The oboist found a way to make her instrument sound like it was singing along with Maya's violin. In the balcony, the music critics who had come expecting to write routine reviews were frantically taking notes. They were witnessing something that happened maybe once in a generation, a young artist discovering their true voice in real time. In front of a live audience, Maya felt like she could play forever. Every phrase led naturally to the next one. Every new idea seemed to grow organically from what came before. She was not thinking about technique or theory or what she was supposed to do. She was simply following the music wherever it wanted to take her, but Maya also knew that she could not play forever. The audience was with her completely now, but she needed to bring them to a satisfying conclusion. She needed to find a way to end her musical story that would leave them feeling complete and fulfilled. Maya began to guide the music toward what she knew would be the climax of her performance. She had broken all the rules to get to this point. Now she needed to prove that breaking the rules had been worth it. Maya felt the music building inside her like a wave gathering strength before it crashes onto the shore. Everything she had played so far had been leading to this moment. All the gentle melodies, all the careful ornaments, all the brave risks she had taken. They were all preparing for what was about to happen. She raised her violin higher and drew her bow across the strings with more power than she had ever used before. The sound that came out was not just music, it was pure emotion made audible. It was her grandmother's love transformed into sound waves that could touch every heart in the hall. Maya's melody soared above the orchestra like a phoenix rising from ashes. She was no longer playing Pachelbel's canon or her grandmother's simple tune. She was playing something entirely new, something that combined everything she had ever felt about music and love and loss and hope into one perfect expression. The violin sang under her fingers with a voice that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical instrument. Every note was exactly where it needed to be, not because Maya was thinking about technique, but because her heart was guiding her hands with perfect certainty. In the audience, people forgot to breathe. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had come to the gala because her husband was a donor, found herself gripping the arms of her seat as Maya's music lifted her out of her everyday worries and carried her to a place she had never been before. She had never cared much about classical music, but this was not just classical music anymore. This was pure human expression that spoke directly to her soul. Young Tommy Martinez, who had been dragged to the concert by his grandmother and had been planning to fall asleep, sat up straight in his chair. Maya's violin was telling a story that he could understand without words, a story about being brave enough to be yourself, even when everyone expects you to be something else. The music critics in the audience had stopped taking notes entirely. James Davidson, who had reviewed concerts for the New York Times for 20 years, sat with tears streaming down his face. He had heard the world's greatest violinists perform in the world's greatest halls, but he had never heard anything like what Maya was creating in this moment. Professor Williams stood in the wings, watching his careful, quiet student command the stage like she had been born for it. All his rules about playing safely, all his instructions about staying invisible had been completely abandoned, and he realized that Maya had been right to abandon them. Some music was too important to play safely. Maya reached the highest notes her violin could produce, and she played them with such clarity and power that they seemed to hang in the air like stars. But she was not showing off her technical ability. Every high note served the emotional story she was telling. Every difficult passage led to an even more beautiful musical moment. The orchestra was completely under Maya's spell now. They were no longer following the conductor or playing from their sheet music. They were following Maya's musical vision, adding their voices to her story in ways they had never planned or rehearsed. The cellist played a low, warm harmony that made Maya's high notes sound even more magical. The French horn added a singing melody that danced around Maya's main theme. The flute provided delicate decorations that sparkled like jewels in the musical fabric Maya was weaving. Maya brought her violin down from the highest register and began to play with the kind of emotional intensity that she had never known she possessed. The melody poured out of her instrument like water from a broken dam. Carrying away everything that had ever held her back or made her afraid, she played phrases that made people think of their first love, of children laughing, of sunsets over the ocean. She played passages that reminded them of their deepest losses, their most profound hopes, their greatest dreams. Every person in the audience heard something different in her music, but they all heard something that mattered to them personally. The gentleman in the third row thought of his wife, who had died the year before. Maya's music somehow captured both his grief at losing her and his gratitude for having loved her. The young couple on the balcony held hands tighter as Maya's violin sang about the kind of love that lasts forever. Maya felt like she was flying. She was no longer aware of being on a stage or holding a violin or standing in front of hundreds of people. She was pure music, pure emotion, pure joy at being able to share the deepest parts of herself with others. Her grandmother's simple melody had grown into something magnificent and complex, but it had never lost its essential sweetness. Maya could feel her grandmother's presence in the music, approving of every choice she was making, encouraging her to be even braver. As Maya approached what she knew would be the final climax of her performance, she gathered all the musical themes she had introduced and began to weave them together into one powerful statement. Pachelbel's original canon was there, transformed but recognizable. Her grandmother's tune was there, now played with the full power of classical technique. The folk elements were there, the jazz influences, the modern rhythms, all of it coming together in a musical symphony that should have been chaos, but was instead perfect harmony. Maya's bow moved across the strings with such speed and precision that it seemed to blur. But every note was crystal clear, every phrase perfectly shaped. She was playing faster and more technically difficult music than she had ever attempted before, but it felt as natural as breathing. The audience leaned forward in their seats, some of them literally on the edge of sitting down. They could feel that Maya was building toward something extraordinary, something that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Maya raised her violin one final time and played a phrase so beautiful, so perfect, so emotionally overwhelming that several people in the audience gasped out loud. The notes seemed to hang in the air forever, filling every space in the great hall with pure, perfect sound. And then, with a final, gentle stroke of her bow, Maya brought her incredible journey to an end. The last note faded slowly into silence, leaving the hall filled with the kind of quiet that only comes after something truly magical has happened. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Nobody made a sound. They were all still caught up in the spell that Maya had woven with her violin and her heart, and her courage to be completely, authentically herself. Maya stood at center stage, her violin still tucked under her chin, looking out at an audience that had been transformed by her music. Just as much as she had been transformed by the experience of playing it, she had set the hall on fire, not with flames, but with the kind of musical passion that burns itself into human hearts and never goes out. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Maya stood at center stage, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. She looked out at the audience, hundreds of faces staring back at her in complete stillness. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Had she gone too far? Had she ruined Pachelbel's beautiful piece by adding her own ideas to it? Had she embarrassed herself and her school in front of all these important people? The quiet felt so heavy that Maya began to worry she had failed completely. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause began. It started with one person in the front row, an elderly man who began clapping slowly and deliberately. Then the woman next to him joined in. Then the people behind them. Within seconds, the entire hall erupted into the kind of thunderous applause that Maya had only heard on recordings of the world's greatest concerts. But this was not polite, respectful clapping. This was not the kind of applause that audiences gave because they were supposed to. This was raw, emotional, overwhelming appreciation from people who had just experienced something they would never forget. The entire audience rose to their feet as one. Maya had never seen a standing ovation before, except in movies. She certainly had never imagined that she would be the one receiving it. But here were hundreds of people, all standing and clapping and cheering for her. Maya felt her knees go. Weak, she had to grip her violin tighter to keep from dropping it. Tears started to stream down her face, but she was smiling so widely that her cheeks hurt. She had never felt anything like this in her entire life. In the front row, the music. Critics were clapping harder than anyone. James Davidson, who had reviewed concerts for 20 years and prided himself on maintaining professional objectivity, was applauding with tears in his eyes. He had already decided that this would be the lead story in his review, maybe the most important review he would ever write. Professor Williams rushed onto the stage, his face showing a mixture of amazement, pride, and something that looked like shock. He reached Maya and put his arm around her shoulders, leaning close to speak in her ear over the continuing applause. "Where did that come from?" he asked, his voice full of wonder. Maya looked at him with shining eyes. "I do not know," she said. "Honestly, I just let the music take me where it wanted to go." Professor Williams shook his head in amazement. In all his years of teaching, he had never seen a transformation like the one he had just witnessed. Maya had walked onto this stage as a nervous student trying to play it safe. She was walking off as an artist who had found her true voice. The applause continued for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. People in the audience were not just clapping, they were calling out, "Bravo," and "Magnificent." Some were wiping away tears. Others were hugging the people next to them, strangers connected by the shared experience of Maya's music. Maya tried to bow gracefully, the way she had been taught, but her legs were still shaking from adrenaline and emotion. She managed to lower her head and acknowledge the audience's appreciation, but mostly she just stood there in amazement that this was really happening to her. The orchestra members were standing and applauding too. Rachel, the section leader who had worried about Maya's ability to command a stage, was clapping enthusiastically and grinning from ear to ear. The cellist who had been kind to Maya during rehearsal was nodding his approval and mouthing, "Beautiful." The conductor was shaking his head in wonder, clearly as surprised as everyone else by what had just happened. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the applause began to die down and people started to take their seats again. But Maya could see that the energy in the hall had completely changed. People were talking excitedly to each other, their faces animated and bright. She had given them something special, something they had not expected when they came to the concert that evening. As Maya walked off the stage, she felt like she was floating. Her legs did not seem to be touching the ground. Everything around her looked brighter and more vivid than it had before. She had discovered something about herself that she had never known existed. Backstage, Maya was immediately surrounded by people wanting to congratulate her. Musicians from the orchestra shook her hand and told her how inspiring her performance had been. Stage workers who had seen hundreds of concerts told her they had never heard anything quite like what she had just done. "That was incredible," said Rachel, giving Maya a hug. "I have never been part of a performance like that. You took us all on a journey we never expected to take." "I was just following my heart," Maya said, still not quite believing that she had really done what everyone was telling her she had done. "That is exactly what made it so special," said the conductor, joining their conversation. "You were not just playing notes. You were sharing your soul with everyone in that hall." Maya's phone started buzzing with text messages. Her parents had been listening to a live stream of the concert from their restaurant. Her father had texted, "We are so proud of you." The customers here all stopped eating to listen. Her mother had sent a string of heart emojis followed by, "Grandmother would be so happy." Professor Williams found Maya in the crowd of well-wishers. "Maya, there are some people who would like to meet you," he said, his voice still sounding slightly stunned. "Music directors from several orchestras, representatives from recording companies, critics who want to interview you." Maya felt overwhelmed by the attention. A few hours ago, she had been a nervous student hoping not to embarrass herself. Now she was being treated like a professional musician, like someone whose opinion and talent mattered. "I do not understand," Maya said to Professor Williams. "I just played one piece. I just did what felt right in the moment." "That is exactly why everyone wants to meet you," Professor Williams replied. "What you did tonight." "Maya, most musicians spend their entire careers trying to find the kind of authentic voice that you discovered tonight. And you found it not in a practice room or a lesson, but on stage in front of hundreds of people when it mattered most." Maya thought about her grandmother, about the simple tune that had started this whole transformation. She realized that her grandmother had been trying to teach her something all those years ago that she was only now beginning to understand. Music was not about perfection. It was not about following rules or staying invisible. Music was about courage, the courage to be yourself, even when that self was different from what everyone expected. As Maya talked with the people who wanted to meet her, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt like she belonged in the music world, not as someone trying to fit in or hide in the back row, but as someone who had something unique and valuable to offer. The shy, careful student who had walked onto the stage was gone. In her place was an artist who had learned that the most powerful performances came not from playing it safe, but from having the courage to set your heart on fire and let the whole world see it burn. Maya woke up the next morning to the sound of her phone ringing. She had barely slept, her mind still spinning from everything that had happened the night before. The performance felt like a dream, something too wonderful to have really happened to her, but the phone kept ringing, and when Maya answered it, she heard Professor Williams's excited voice on the other end. "Maya, you need to see this," he said. "Check your email. Check social media. Check the news. You are everywhere." Maya sat up in bed, confused. "What do you mean everywhere?" "Someone recorded your performance last night and posted it online. It has been shared thousands of times already. Music blogs are writing about it. The video has been viewed over 1 million times since midnight." Maya could not believe what she was hearing. She grabbed her laptop and opened her email. Her inbox was flooded with messages from people she had never heard of. Record companies, talent agents, music schools, orchestra directors, and hundreds of regular people who had seen the video and wanted to tell her how her music had moved them. Maya clicked on one of the links Professor Williams had sent her. There was her performance from the night before, filmed by someone in the audience on their phone. The video quality was not perfect, but the sound was clear enough that Maya could hear every note she had played. But more interesting than the video itself were the comments below it. Thousands of people from all over the world had written about how Maya's performance had affected them. "I have never cared about classical music before, but this made me cry," wrote someone from California. "This young woman has found something that most professional musicians never discover," wrote a music teacher from Germany. "I am starting violin lessons tomorrow because of this video," wrote a teenager from Japan. Maya scrolled through comment after comment, each one telling her how her music had touched someone's life. She read messages from other young musicians who said her performance had inspired them to be braver in their own playing. She read notes from older people who said her music had reminded them of loved ones they had lost. There were also messages from music professionals. A conductor from the London Symphony Orchestra had written that he would love to work with her. A representative from a major recording label had asked if she was interested in making an album. The dean of a prestigious music school had offered her a full scholarship for graduate studies. Maya felt overwhelmed by all the attention. She was happy, but also a little scared. She had never expected that one performance could change her life so completely and so quickly. Her phone rang again. This time it was a reporter from a classical music magazine who wanted to interview her. After that, it was a representative from a concert management company. Then it was another music school. The calls kept coming all day. By afternoon, Maya's performance was being discussed on national news programs. Music critics were calling it a once-in-a-generation moment, and the most important classical music performance of the year. Some were even saying it might change how classical music was taught and performed. Maya watched one news segment where a famous violinist was talking about her performance. "What this young woman did last night was revolutionary," the violinist sighed. "She showed us that classical music does not have to be a museum piece. It can be alive, personal, and emotionally relevant to modern audiences." But the most meaningful response came from other young musicians. Videos started appearing online of students all over the world playing their own versions of classical pieces with personal touches added. They were calling it the Maya Shun Challenge, taking traditional music and making it their own. A violin student in Brazil added rhythms from samba music to a batch piece. A pianist in Korea incorporated traditional Korean melodies into a Chopin nocturne. A flute player in Mexico wove folk songs from her grandmother's village into a Mozart concerto. Maya watched these videos with tears in her eyes. She realized that her performance had given other young musicians permission to be themselves, to bring their own cultural backgrounds and personal experiences into their music. 3 days after the gala, Maya received a phone call that changed everything. It was from the director of the New York Philharmonic, one of the most famous orchestras in the world. "Miss Chun," the director said, "we would like to invite you to perform as a guest soloist with our orchestra next month. We think our audience would love to hear what you did with the canon, and we would be honored to support your artistry." Maya almost dropped the phone. The New York Philharmonic was the kind of orchestra that only featured the world's most famous musicians. She had never imagined that she would be invited to play with them. "But I am just a student," Maya said. "Miss Chun," the director replied, "what you did the other night proved that you are much more than just a student. You are an artist with something important to say. That is exactly what we look for in our guest soloists." Maya accepted the invitation, and within a week it was announced in music publications around the world. The concert sold out within hours. People who had never been to a classical music concert before bought tickets because they wanted to experience what Maya had created. Maya began receiving invitations from orchestras in other cities, other countries. Music festivals wanted her to perform. Recording companies wanted to sign her to contracts. She had more opportunities than she could possibly accept, but more important than all the professional success was the impact Maya's performance was having on music education. Schools around the world began changing how they taught classical music. Instead of focusing only on technical perfection and strict adherence to written scores, teachers started encouraging students to find their own voices within the classical tradition. Professor Williams completely changed his teaching methods. "Maya taught me something I should have known all along," he told his colleagues. "Our job is not to create perfect copies of each other. Our job is to help each student discover their unique musical voice." Maya's performance had started a conversation about the future of classical music. Young people were showing new interest in learning traditional instruments because they could see that classical music could be personally expressive, not just technically impressive. 6 months after that night at the Hartwell Concert Hall, Maya released her first album. It featured traditional classical pieces that she had reimagined with elements from her own cultural background and personal experiences. The album became the best-selling classical recording of the year, but Maya never forgot the lesson her grandmother had taught her and that she had learned so dramatically on stage that night. Music was not about being perfect or following rules or staying invisible. Music was about having the courage to share your heart with the world. Maya kept a photo of her grandmother on her music stand wherever she performed. Before each concert, she would look at the photo and remember that simple tune her grandmother used to hum. Then she would walk onto the stage, not as someone trying to impress people or prove herself, but as someone ready to share the most honest and beautiful parts of herself with anyone willing to listen. Maya Chun had walked onto a stage as an unknown student trying to play it safe. She had walked off as an artist who had learned that sometimes, to truly serve the music, you have to be willing to set the whole world on fire. And in doing so, she had given permission to countless other young musicians to find the courage to let their own fires burn bright.